Mark, I appreciate that, even under the circumstances, you still always looked at my father different." Those words came from Hulk Hogan in a recent text message to Mark Henry, years after one of the most shocking acts of forgiveness in wrestling history. But to understand why those words meant so much, you have to go back to July 2015, when the wrestling world was turned upside down by a scandal that destroyed Hulk Hogan's career overnight. The leaked audio recordings hit the wrestling world like a bomb. Hulk Hogan, the ultimate American hero, the man who had represented everything good about wrestling for 3 decades, was caught on tape using racial slurs and making statements that shattered his carefully constructed image forever. Within hours, WWE had fired him. His Hall of Fame profile disappeared from their website. Sponsors fled. The wrestling community, which had dealt with its share of controversies over the years, had never seen anything quite like this. This wasn't just another scandal, this was the complete destruction of wrestling's biggest legend. But while the rest of the world was condemning Hulk Hogan, one man was processing the situation very differently. Mark Henry, one of the most respected African-American wrestlers in history, was hurt by what he had heard. Not just disappointed, genuinely hurt in a way that cut deep. "When I saw him, most people would be like, 'Oh, him, I'm never going to speak to him again. I don't care,'" Mark would later recall. "I was hurt, and I said, 'Man, you mean to tell me all these years that we talked, you don't like me because of my color?'" What Mark discovered in that conversation would shock him even more than the original recordings. "No, Mark," Hulk replied. That's bullshit." "Well, what's the deal?" Mark pressed. Hulk's explanation revealed a man who had made terrible choices in a moment of anger and intoxication, but who understood the gravity of what he had done. He was upset. He don't want to hear about his daughter having sex with nobody. "I'm mad. I was mad. I was half drunk and I was acting like I was a tough guy, and I embarrassed myself." That's when Mark Henry did something that nobody in wrestling expected. Instead of walking away, instead of adding his voice to the chorus of condemnation, he offered Hulk something precious, a path to redemption. "Well, fix it," Mark told him simply. "There's a lot of people that still love you. They just want to hear you apologize." But Hulk's response revealed the influence of his legal team and the fear that was driving his decisions. "Well, I've been advised not to talk about it no more." Mark's reaction was immediate and blunt. "That's a bad decision." What Mark proposed next was unprecedented in wrestling history. He offered Hulk a detailed roadmap for genuine redemption, a way to turn the worst moment of his career into an opportunity for real growth and healing. "I want to hear your opinion on this," Vince McMahon had called Mark to ask, after Hulk mentioned their conversation. "Terry said that you said it could be fixed." Mark's response was both compassionate and practical. "It can be, but he's got to apologize, and he's got to go to some of the black colleges, law schools, and he's got to talk to them and tell them why it is he did what he did." The plan Mark outlined was specific and powerful. Hulk would need to face the people he had hurt with his words. He would need to sit in rooms full of young black men and women and explain himself honestly. He would need to admit that even in his worst moment, making the recording was a bad decision, that what I did with my buddy and his wife was a bad decision, that drinking and doing drugs was a bad decision, and that what I said was bad. Everything about it was bad. Mark explained Hulk should say, "I was just surrounded by bad and evil and no good, and I'm sorry." According to Mark, this approach would have worked. This would have gotten it fixed, he believed. But Hulk wouldn't do it. The refusal wasn't immediate or dramatic. It came through inaction, through continued reliance on legal advice that prioritized damage control over genuine accountability. While Mark waited for Hulk to follow through on their conversation, nothing happened. The impact of this missed opportunity extended far beyond Hulk's personal reputation. Mark Henry had offered something extraordinary, his own credibility and standing in the African American community to help a man who had used racial language. It was an act of grace that few people would have been capable of in such circumstances. Now he's not here to defend himself about it no more, and he can't apologize now. All Mark reflected years later, acknowledging that the window for genuine redemption had largely closed. But I've had people that are very close to him tell me how he wished that he would have did it. The wrestling community watched this unfold with a mixture of admiration for Mark's character and disappointment in Hulk's response. Here was a man who had every right to be angry and vindictive, instead offering practical help and genuine forgiveness. And here was another man who had been handed a gift of redemption, only to let it slip away because it required too much courage and too much humility. Mark's assessment of the situation remained consistent over the years. Redemption was possible, but it required genuine work. "They can't never apologize for him," he said about Hulk's family and supporters. "No matter how much work that they do, it's not going to fix it with black people and white people that sympathize with black people and white people that are just decent humans. It's not going to fix it now." The tragedy of the situation became even clearer when viewed through the lens of Mark's own character. This was a man who had spent his career putting others first, who had used his position and influence to help younger wrestlers, who had always conducted himself with dignity and class. His offer to help Hulk represented the very best of what wrestling could be. Hulk's refusal to accept that help represented everything that was wrong with wrestling's old guard mentality. The belief that image management was more important than character development, that legal protection was more valuable than genuine accountability. The contrast between these two approaches became a defining moment for both men's legacies. Mark Henry emerged from the situation with his reputation enhanced, recognized as a man of extraordinary character who was willing to extend grace even when he had been personally hurt. Hulk Hogan's legacy, meanwhile, was further damaged, not just by his original comments, but by his response to Mark's offer of help. The wrestling community understood that he had been given an unprecedented opportunity for redemption and had chosen to ignore it. Years later, when other wrestling personalities found themselves in similar controversies, Mark's blueprint became the standard against which their responses were measured. Those who followed his advice about genuine accountability and community engagement were able to rebuild their careers and reputations. Those who chose the path of legal silence and strategic avoidance found far less success. The most poignant aspect of the entire situation was captured in Brooke Hogan's text to Mark. "I appreciate that even under the circumstances, you still always looked at my father different. If you ever need me, I'm here because I want to try to help repair his legacy." Mark's response was characteristic of his generous spirit. He wanted to help, but the work had to come from Hulk himself. The opportunity for genuine redemption was still there, but it required the courage to accept responsibility and do the difficult work of earning forgiveness through actions, not just words. The story of Mark Henry's offer to help Hulk Hogan stands as one of wrestling's greatest examples of character, forgiveness, and missed opportunities. It shows what's possible when someone chooses grace over grievance, and what's lost when pride prevents someone from accepting the help they need. For Mark Henry, it represented everything he believed about wrestling and life, that people deserve second chances, but only if they're willing to do the work to earn them. That redemption is possible, but it requires genuine humility and authentic change. For Hulk Hogan, it represented a choice that would define the final chapter of his legacy. He could have become a powerful example of how someone can face their worst mistakes and emerge stronger. Instead, he became a cautionary tale about what happens when fear and bad advice prevent someone from doing what they know is right. The wrestling world learned something important from watching this unfold. That character isn't just about what you do when everyone is watching, but about what you choose to do when someone offers you a chance to make things right. Mark Henry proved his character by making that offer. Hulk Hogan revealed his by refusing to accept it. The impact of this missed opportunity extended throughout the wrestling industry and beyond. Other athletes and entertainers who found themselves in similar controversies were presented with Mark's approach as a model for genuine redemption. Some followed his blueprint of direct community engagement and honest accountability, with remarkable success. Wrestling veterans who had worked with both men were particularly affected by the story. The Undertaker, who had his own complicated history with backstage politics, acknowledged that Mark's offer represented something unprecedented in wrestling culture. "That took more character than any match either of us ever had," he reflected years later. Stone Cold Steve Austin, who had never been particularly close to either man, was impressed by the contrast in their responses. "Mark showed what it means to be a leader when nobody's forcing you to be one," Austin observed. "Terry showed what happens when you let lawyers make your moral decisions." The African American wrestling community was particularly moved by Mark's gesture. Ron Simmons, another respected black veteran, spoke for many when he said, "Mark gave that man something he didn't deserve and definitely hadn't earned." The fact that it wasn't accepted tells you everything you need to know about both of them. Booker T, who had maintained professional relationships with both men over the years, found himself in an impossible position. He had worked successfully with Hulk in WCW and WWE, but Mark's story made it clear that Hulk had been offered a genuine path to redemption and had chosen not to take it. "I respect what Mark tried to do," Booker said in a later interview, "but I can't continue to associate with someone who won't do the work when they've been shown exactly what the work is." The most tragic aspect of the situation was how preventable it all was. Mark had provided Hulk with a specific actionable plan that would have addressed the core issue while demonstrating genuine remorse and commitment to change. The plan wasn't just about public relations, it was about real education, real accountability, and real growth. Wrestling schools began teaching the story as an example of how to handle adversity with grace versus how to let fear and pride prevent personal growth. The contrast became a case study in crisis management courses, with Mark's approach held up as an example of transformative leadership. Even years later, the wrestling community continued to reference Mark's offer as a standard for how to respond to controversy. When other performers faced similar situations, their responses were inevitably measured against the benchmark that Mark Henry had set. The personal cost to Mark of making this offer should not be underestimated. He put his own reputation and standing in the African American community at risk by extending grace to someone who had used racial language. He was willing to face criticism from people who might have questioned why he would help someone who had expressed such harmful views. But Mark's approach was consistent with everything he had demonstrated throughout his career: a belief that people can change if they're willing to do the work, and a commitment to helping others even when it might cost him personally. His offer to accompany Hulk to black colleges and law schools was particularly significant. Mark was willing to use his own credibility to open doors that would otherwise have been closed, potentially sacrificing his own standing to help someone who had hurt his community. The fact that this extraordinary offer was rejected speaks to more than just missed opportunities. It speaks to fundamental differences in how the two men viewed accountability, growth, and the responsibility that comes with being a public figure. Mark Henry's willingness to help Hulk Hogan represents the best of what wrestling can be when its performers choose principle over politics, community over self-interest, and growth over comfort. It shows that even in an industry known for its egos and rivalries, there are people capable of extraordinary grace and wisdom. Hulk Hogan's rejection of that help represents the worst aspects of wrestling's old guard mentality. The belief that image management is more important than character development, that legal protection is more valuable than genuine accountability, and that admitting fault is weakness rather than strength. The wrestling community has never forgotten this story, and for good reason. It encapsulates everything that makes wrestling both inspiring and frustrating: the capacity for both extraordinary character and profound moral failure, often involving the same people in the same situation. Mark's final assessment of the situation remained both generous and realistic. Redemption was still possible, but it had to come from Hulk himself. No amount of work by his family or supporters could substitute for the personal accountability that Mark had offered to help him achieve. At least, they will know when they go to glory that people won't look at them like, "Hey, he was a part of the problem too," Mark said about Hulk's family. Because they don't deserve that. Even in his disappointment with Hulk's choices, Mark Henry continued to demonstrate the same character that had led him to make his original offer: concern for others, fairness in his judgments, and hope that people can still choose to do the right thing, even when they've previously chosen poorly. The broader implications of this story extended far beyond wrestling. In corporate America, diversity professionals began using Mark's approach as a model for handling racial controversies with genuine accountability, rather than just legal protection. Educational institutions also took notice. Several historically black colleges that Mark had mentioned began incorporating this story into their curricula, teaching students about leadership, forgiveness, and the difference between genuine accountability and strategic silence. The wrestling industry itself was forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about how it had historically handled racial issues. Mark's offer to help Hulk represented a new model of leadership within the wrestling community, one that prioritized healing and growth over protecting established hierarchies. When WWE eventually made the controversial decision to reinstate Hulk Hogan to their Hall of Fame years later, Mark's story provided important context. While some viewed the reinstatement as appropriate, others pointed to Mark's unused blueprint as evidence that genuine redemption had never been pursued. The wrestling community remained divided on whether enough had been done to address the original harm, but there was universal agreement that Mark Henry had set a standard for grace and leadership that few people could match. The lasting impact of Mark Henry's offer to help Hulk Hogan extends far beyond both men's careers. It stands as a permanent reminder that character is revealed not just in how we handle success, but in how we respond to other people's failures. Mark chose grace, accountability, and hope. That choice defines his legacy more than any championship or accomplishment ever could.